All right, welcome to lesson 2.4. This is our last lesson for chapter 2, and we're going to be covering individual and global ethics. So learning objective here, lesson objective, is that you will be able to describe the aspects of both individual and global environmental ethics. So for individual environmental ethics, ethical changes in society and businesses must start with individuals. So we've seen a change in ethics constantly throughout history. As things in society, culture changes, ethics tend to change a little bit with it. But every time we see that change, it has to start with an individual, and then that idea spreads. So we must recognize that our individual actions have a bearing on environmental quality, and that each of us bears some responsibility for the quality of the environment in which we live. If it's typical for all human beings to do this thing that harms the environment, that will never change unless it starts with at the individual level, and then that eventually will work its way up. So the ethics of consumption. So North Americans represent just under 5% of the world's population. However, we consume 22% of the world's oil. So almost a quarter of the world's oil is used by less than 5% of the world's population. And we also use more water and own more cars than anyone else. They waste more food than most people eat in sub-Saharan Africa. So for the ethics of consumption, we'll talk about food. So fertilizers, pesticides, and high-yield crops have more than doubled world food production in the past 20 years. For energy, at current rates of consumption, known oil reserves will not last through the current century. So in order for us to continue using oil in some form, we have to start using less now. Foresighted energy companies are looking ahead by investing in the technologies that will replace fossil fuels. These could be nuclear power, solar, wind, wave, and biomass technologies that are meeting increasing proportions of national energy needs in other countries. We've seen a shift in the U.S. and in North America, but not quite as much of a shift as we've seen in some other countries towards these renewable or less polluting, at least, energy sources. When we talk about water, currently humans use about half of the planet's accessible supply of renewable fresh water. And more than any other resource, water may limit consumerism in the next century. For wild nature, every day in the U.S., between 1,000 and 2,000 hectares of farmland and natural areas are permanently lost to development. We'll talk about this very specifically when we talk about soil, land use, and agriculture in semester 2. But land is not always considered a renewable resource because it takes so long for that land to bounce back from us shifting it from wild space to human-used space, like agriculture. And just because hectare is not something we commonly use, hectare is about 2.5 acres. So we said it all starts on the individual level. So that means our personal choices. Individuals can make many lifestyle changes that significantly reduce their personal impact on the planet. Ecological degradation in any nation inevitably impinges on the quality of life in others. Much of the current environmental crisis is rooted in the widening gap between rich and poor nations. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer, but a lot of that is because of how we are using our resources. We've decided some of the developed countries have recognized that pollution is bad and emitting greenhouse gases is bad and all of these things, so they have laws or agreements to pollute less. A lot of the time that just means that corporations in those countries are going to move their factories and whatever out of the country so that the pollution is happening elsewhere, creating an environmental crisis in another country because of that widening gap. All right, that is the end of this lesson. Please let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you in the next one.